In the U.S. history textbook, it says that sectionalism is the greater loyalty many Americans felt towards their own section than to the country as a whole. Southerners felt that their way of life was being threatened by the North. The Northerners feared that the South wanted to spread slavery throughout the nation. The North and the South's focus was very different. According to the U.S. history textbook, manifest destiny was the belief of Americans that it was their fate to extend across the borders of the nation to the shores of the Pacific. The political purpose of manifest destiny was to expand democracy. The economic purpose was the land and wealth. This was encouraged by the success of farmers in Texas and the discovery of gold in California. And the social roots of manifest destiny were the way the West conveyed their love of the land in paintings, prints, and literature. Also, occupying the middle of the continent from coast to coast would discourage threats from rival powers like England, Spain, or Russia. More land shows more power. More power equals more land.
According to the social studies book, the cause of the U.S.-Mexican War was because of the southern border of Texas. Whether the border was to be Rio Grande or the Nueces River, later on President Polk ordered troops into the contested area. This is significant because if the choice hadn't been made, we wouldn't know where the border was to separate the rivers, to have more land or less. According to the social studies book, the effects of the U.S.-Mexican War is that Mexico was defeated and forced to give up states. The states were California, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, and parts of Colorado and New Mexico. Then the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the U.S. gave Mexico $15 million for the land. This was significant because it shows how much the U.S. gained from this war.
According to the notes taken off of Mr. Gomez's slides, the north side of America, slavery is illegal, but still, African American people did not have full rights. According to the slide, it states illegal since the Revolution, meaning that since the American Revolution, Pennsylvania made slavery illegal in 1780, being the first to make it legal. Since this is significant because it encouraged more states to make slavery illegal and gave African Americans more rights.
As I found in the U.S. history textbook, the nullification crisis was a crisis of which a high tariff issue and states' rights played a big part in. Northern manufacturers favored a high tariff to protect their industries from foreign competition. Southern states opposed a high tariff on imports. John C. Calhoun argued that each state had the right to nullify an unconstitutional law in its own territory. Henry Clay proposed a compromise through a reduction in tariffs over the next 10 years. Daniel Weber pointed out that the Constitution assigned the task of determining a law's constitutionality to the Supreme Court, not to the states.
According to the social studies book, the causes of economic differences of the North was that the industrialization process of production were divided up and reorganized. The skilled craftsmen were replaced by unskilled workers who worked in large workshops or factories. Gradually, the number of workers in northern factories increased. In the West, there was flat land and fertile soil, and that became the main producer of grains like wheat and corn. Farmers began using machines like, for example, the mechanical plow, reaper, and thrasher. This was significant because the West was replacing the North from growing corn, wheat, and milling flour. Over the next 40 years, the plantation system of cultivation of king cotton spread throughout the South. It was hard to satisfy the enormous demand for raw cotton from the factories of Northeast in England. The cultivation of cotton and other cash crops led some southern states to enormous improvement in industry and transportation. Southern plantations exhausted the soil. They fell into debt and didn't develop new technologies. The South fell behind the North in the number of railroads, factories, and schools. Southern cities generally remained small and lacked industry. This was significant because it showed and made you understand why each of the reasons for economic differences. According to the social studies book, the effects of economic differences for North was that it was a industrial place, so it automatically was more wealthy. The West was mostly fertile and flat land and was starting to fight over being a slave state or free. While the South was mostly plantation, it was not as wealthy as the other regions. This was significant because it shows the different regions and how different each of them were from each other.
The reason for Henry David Thoreau's civil disobedience was to protest against slavery and the Mexican War by not paying taxes. In the 8th grade history textbook, it said he was jailed for one night for failing to pay taxes. He did this to protest against a government that enforced slavery and which he felt had wrongly gone to war with Mexico to extend slavery. This peaceful civil disobedience led other people like Martin Luther King, who used peaceful protest.
According to the social studies textbook, the Democrats wanted the nation to ban slavery and give all Americans rights. Republican Party wanted states to have their own rights and to choose if they wanted to ban or keep slavery. The Whigs were half and half. Half of them wanted slavery because they lived in the South, and the other half were against because they lived in the North.
State and created Utah and New Mexico territories with the question of slavery to be determined by popular sovereignty. This also ended the slave trade in Washington, D.C. The South gained a stronger fugitive state law, and the North gained a new free state, California. The contributions of significant political, social, and military leaders such as Frederick Douglass was that they influenced the public and inspired others through their actions. According to the U.S. history textbook, Frederick Douglass, like many other significant leaders, influenced people's image and ideas. This is significant because it shows how social and military leaders influenced and inspired people of the United States.
According to the history textbook, it states that the north side of America had Catholic white Americans, the south side of America had Catholic white and African Americans, which were used as slaves. The west side had Native Americans and scattered religion because of how many there were and tribes. They had to believe in something different. The reasons why people immigrated to the north side of America was to get away from slaves and become more of an industrial worker. The reason why they moved to the south side was to become a slave owner or to try and get some slaves. The reason why they went to the west side was to conquer or colonize the amount of land they had over there.
Main point of national politics. In the beginning, most of the abolitionists were publicly criticized. Mobs sometimes attacked the abolitionists in North. The Southerners lit fire to the anti-slavery pamphlets and denied them from being in the mail. The U.S. Congress imposed the gag rule to avoid considering abolitionist petitions. John Quincy Adams, the former president, returned to Congress after his term and spent his final politic years fighting against the gag rule. Finally, in 1833, the British Empire put an end to slavery. By 1838, more than 1,350 anti-slavery societies existed in the U.S. After slavery was banned, many former slaves wrote numerous slavery books, like Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. This abolition movement was very significant because it showed the process of slavery getting abolished and the fight that had to be fought.